So have you ever met someone, you've met someone and they've been married for 30 years and they can't stand each other? Have you ever met someone that's worked a job for 20 years and you say, hey, you must really love that job. You've been there 20 years. And he's like, I've hated the last 19 years of it. You're like, why? Why are you there? Why are you in a job that you despise? Why would you continue to work there? And they're like, oh, well, it's a job. So recently in one of my podcasts, I talked to you about a book that I absolutely love. I've been talking about it for years and years. On the lecture circuit, when I travel, I give these books out on a regular basis. It's called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, MD. It's one of my favorite little reads. And I did a podcast on this recently, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one. But it's a great little book about how we as humans resist change, appraisers in particular. I was teaching a class today, and I said, I'm going to be moving your cheese today. You're going to resist me because it's your human instinct to do so. During that last podcast, I also told you about another book that I'm reading now. And I told you I was going to talk to you about it and introduce it to you. So this book is a fantastic read. Hound Kemp gave this to me. It's a thick book, so it scared me a little bit. It's called Build for Tomorrow by Jason Feifer, and I'm excited about it. It's a great book, and I want to take some time to talk to you about it. So come on back and join the conversation, and we'll talk about this book. Hi, this is Brian Reynolds. You're listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast, brought to you by the very fine folks of Appraiser eLearning. You need some education? Check us out at appraiserelearning.com. I'd also like to thank our new sponsor, LIA Administrators and Insurance Services. Thank you, LIA, for your support of the Appraisal Update Podcast. Now, guys, I've got a special treat. I am so honored and so excited. I've actually got the author of this book on my program today. So welcome, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so glad you've been reading the book.
Oh my gosh, I can't, it's been such a treat. And my listeners know, because I'm pretty transparent, I'm not an avid reader, but I'm trying to do better. I know you get smart that way. So Jason, tell my audience a little bit about you. I mean, you're editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. You have a podcast, I think, or a few podcasts. You've worked at various newspapers around the country. Just tell my listeners a little bit about you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. So, as you say, I am the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. Do a lot of other things. Speaking, I host 2 podcasts, startup advising, some consulting, and some other stuff. I have 2 kids. And I have found in my work, talking to and studying entrepreneurs, as well as studying the history of innovation, which is something I'm really fascinated by, that the thing that drives success is adaptability. It is the ability to see change as an opportunity. And this isn't something that people are born with. This is a skill that people learn and develop. And I became especially fascinated by it at the beginning of the pandemic, because that was when we saw everybody go through the exact same change at the exact same time and then radically diverge. And I have watched in the years since people reinvent themselves and their businesses. I've also watched people feel completely lost. And I wanted to understand how people are able to recognize that the thing that they do today is not necessarily the way in which they have to do it tomorrow. And that the people who are able to build the reality of impending change into how they operate today are the people who are most prepared for tomorrow, even if nobody can predict it. And I wanted to learn what they're doing so that I could share it with everybody.
That's fantastic. And so I could just talk to you all day. I want to talk about a couple of things in your book that jumped out at me. And sure. So I shared with Jason, as my listeners know, we don't rehearse these. It's just a conversation. He has no idea. You have no idea what I'm about to ask you, do you?
I do not.
So I've been highlighting portions of this book, and I'm not completely through it, but I've been highlighting it. Hal called me one day and said, "You want me to get you an audio version?" I said, "Absolutely not. I'm highlighting this thing. It's like my job right now." So in the introduction, one of the things I highlighted, your life exactly as you know it now will not exist in a few years. It's a guarantee. Now, that sounds a little scary. So what do you mean by that? Let my listeners know what you mean exactly by that.
Well, I mean, on a very literal level, the exact structure of your life, the people around you, the exact relationships that you have, the way in which you do your work, the way in which you split your time, that will not exist going forward. That is a moment in time. And it is a moment in time that replaced the previous moment in time that replaced the previous moment in time. I mean, right
Right.
now, I'll just give you, for me, I have a 8-year-old or almost 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I have a lot of projects that are in various states of development. And if you flash forward a few years, well, first of all, I am not a parent in the way that I am a parent now. I have 2 little kids who are very needy and demanding, and that's not going to exist anymore. I will have a different relationship with my kids because they're going to be older. They're going to have different needs. I'm going to have to evolve as a parent. But also the projects that I'm working on are going to be in various states. Some of them will have failed. Some of them might have succeeded. And that's going to force me to rethink how I spend my time, and maybe even who I am in relationship to the audience that I serve. And that's all really exciting. And so I think that if I can spend my time right now being mindful of how I will need to be different people in the future, then I can start to think about what skills can I develop right now? How can I let go, not in a I don't care about this stuff kind of way, but rather in a I can't spend my time protecting the exact structure of my life right now, because instead I need to spend my time figuring out how to maximize whatever's going to come next. We spend far too much time debating whether or not something should happen when it has already happened. So why don't we instead spend that energy figuring out how to make the most of it?
Seems like we do a lot of complaining after the fact.
Yes.
Some change hits us and we want to complain about it as opposed to accepting it. You talk about, and what's interesting, I always use the little saying, change is going to happen whether you want to or not. If you don't believe me, look in the mirror. Things are going to change whether you want them to or not. You talk about 4 phases, and I want to get into that for just a second, right? And panic is the first one, and I believe that to be true because the folks that I talk to are very fearful. We're, as human beings, we fear the unknown.
Sure.
And man, change is all about unknown. So if you don't mind, kind of go over those 4 phases for my audience. Don't go too deep in the last 2 because I haven't finished the book yet.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Don't want to spoil anything. So
Right.
What you're describing is the 4 phases of change. My argument is that everybody goes through change in 4 phases. The first is panic, where we feel like everything around us is disappearing. And that feels incredibly scary. And there's good reason for that. It's not a flaw of yours. It is how you are programmed. Decades of psychological research have confirmed what's called loss aversion theory. Loss aversion theory is that you, as a human being, are programmed to be more concerned about protecting against loss than you are in seeking out new gain. That shows up in study after study. And so when we experience change, the first thing that we do is we think of the things that we have that are comfortable and familiar to us. And then we think about how those things are going to no longer be as accessible to us. And that's going to feel like loss. And then we're going to extrapolate it. We're going to say, well, because I've lost this thing, then this other thing is no longer going to be accessible. And then this other thing is not going to work as well. And then I'm not needed in this way. And then we feel like we have no foundation left. And that's panic. After that, we get to phase 2, which is adaptation, which is where we look around and we say, all right, well, what new things do I actually have to work with? How do I reconstruct or build on top of? And then phase 3 is the new normal, where we have some new comforts, some new familiarities. We start to get reoriented. We find new ways to provide value to people. And then we get to the 4th, the most important, wouldn't go back, which is to say a time in which you can look at what you have and say, I have something so new and valuable that I wouldn't want to go back to a time before I had it. That is available to everybody. That is on the other side of this. The question really is up to you, which is how efficiently do you want to move towards it?
Yeah, what's interesting? I demonstrated that today. I was teaching a virtual class today. And by the way, you talk about, COVID, the pandemic. I was the second person in our local hospital in March of 2020, and they didn't know what to do with me, so I'm blessed to be here. But my business was one of my businesses was teaching live in-person classes. And man, COVID stopped that entirely. So if I had not diversified, I'd be out of business right now. If I didn't adapt to that major change that was really forced upon us, and okay, let's try virtual learning, right? And different ways to do that. I'd probably be out of business. But today I was talking about folks and encouraging them to use, as appraisers, there are a lot of appraisers out there that still use a clipboard and a pen, right? And your doctor and Chick-fil-A uses an iPad to take your order, for crying out loud. So we're trying to encourage appraisers to embrace technology and change. But change is very hard, and so I had about 30 people in the class today. Several said they still use a clipboard, and then I said, okay, well, how many of you use multiple monitors? And the funny thing, Jason, was some of those that have resisted the technology out in the field are using multiple monitors in there. I'm like, why? I said, would you go back to one? And to your point, none of them would go back to one monitor after they experience using multiple monitors. It's pretty interesting. Hey, a couple of things I want to get to. Widen the bands. Talk a little bit about that. I found that very interesting in your book when you talked about being overconfident and widening the bands.
Yeah. So there's a story that I tell in the book in which I talk to a guy named Warren Hatch, who is the CEO of a forecasting company called Good Judgment. So Good Judgment operates in a really interesting way, which is let's say that you are in the plastics industry and you want to know what's going to happen in plastics in 2 years. Well, you go to Good Judgment and you give them your questions, and they'll distribute those questions to a global network of what they call super forecasters. Super forecasters are people who are considerably better than the average person at being able to look at data and project what is likely to happen next. And I wanted to know, well, how are these people doing that? Because that's the closest I think that we can come to fortune telling, is to be able to tell the future is somebody who's able to look at available information. We all have available information. If you're going through some kind of change, yes, you may feel like there's a lot that you don't know, and there is, but there's a lot you do know too. And so let's look at available information and figure out what's coming next. So how are they able to do that? I called up Warren. I said, are there things that they're doing that the rest of us can learn from? And he said, yeah, well, first of all, they're great pattern matchers. They are good at identifying and setting aside their own biases. And but then most important, he said they are not overconfident, because if you ask people in a room, right, next time you're in a room with a lot of people, ask them to raise their hands if they're overconfident. Nobody will. But if you test them for overconfidence, then you discover that actually a lot of people are overconfident. And I asked him for an example of this, and he gave me this little quiz, which, I mean, you're familiar with it because you read it in my book, but maybe I should, I can give people something to think about and play along with as they're listening here. So what he did is he asked me what year I thought Gandhi was born. And I didn't know the answer to that. I'm not a good trivia guy. He said, this isn't a trivia question. Doesn't matter if I know the answer, but here's what he wants me to do. Tell me the earliest year I think Gandhi could have been born in, likely been born in, and the latest year I think Gandhi likely could have been born. The earliest and the latest. So take a second and think about that for yourself. It's okay if you don't know the answer. Just come up with what that range is for you. And now my answer was ridiculous. Well, what was when you were reading this? Did you have an idea in your head?
Yes, sir. Yes, I most certainly did. And I've tested 3 people since then on this very question. Yeah, my guess was 1922.
Did you have a range?
Yes, and my second one, my second answer, and I'll just I let you bias me because I saw in your book 1940, and I'm like, gosh dang it, I can't get that out of my head now. I'll go with 1940. So my range was from 1922 to 1940.
Okay, great. So, and then my range was 1940 to 1955. So your range was 18 years and my range was 15 years. And before we reveal the answer, did you, in your heart of hearts, feel like you had any idea what the answer to this question was?
I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue. I really didn't. And the three people I interviewed, they were more of a narrow range than you and I. But I interviewed a young lady this morning who works for me. Claire, you've been in contact, and she actually got it right. I'm like, how did you get that right?
She's got it right. Well, good for her.
Yeah. Well, she got the range right. How's that?
So, right. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, good. So here's the answer. The answer is 1869, and so when he said that, I laughed and I said, "Oh man, I don't know anything about Gandhi." And he says, "You don't need to know anything about Gandhi. The problem here, and what this is really a test of, is how wide or narrow are your bands?" Because what he had asked me to do, and what we just talked about here, was to pick a range. And that range should be informed by how aware we are of the knowledge we think that we have. And the problem with overconfidence is that we are not consciously respecting the knowledge we think or do not know, or that we think we have or are not aware that we don't have. And so what we tend to do is we tend to narrow our bands. We tend to narrow the amount of information that we're willing to consider, or to narrow the amount of options that we're willing to put forth. You and I didn't know anything about when Gandhi was born, and yet based on nothing, we chose very narrow bands. We picked 18 or 15 years. Whereas what we could have done is very easily said, the earliest that he was born was 1600 and the latest he was born was 1980, which was a absurd range, but also would have been informed by the knowledge we actually knew we had, which was nothing, and therefore it would have actually gotten the answer correct, because 1869 would have been a part of it. Now, here's what's so interesting about this. I have done this in groups around the country, because I travel around, I do a lot of speaking. And when I do it with executives, very experienced, seasoned professionals, and they're willing to guess, because a lot of them are not willing to guess, but when they're willing to guess, they do exactly what you and I just did. They pick these narrow ranges. But then I also do this with college students, because I speak at a lot of colleges, and they do a version of what I just said we should have done, which is that they'll throw out a 200-year range, a 300-year range. And the first time somebody does it, everybody in the room laughs. But then they all kind of start doing some version of that. And of course, they're correct. And I wondered what is going on here. And I came to a conclusion. And the conclusion is this. I think, and this isn't in the book because at the time I hadn't road tested this, but I think that as we get older and we become established in our careers, we carry around the expectation that we should know the answer to things. And therefore, when we're presented with a situation in which we don't really know the answer, the first thing that we do is instinctually narrow what the potential answer could be. And this is a mistake, as Warren says, because, of course, these problems compound. So if I make a decision because I know this, and then I'm going to make a decision on top of that because I know that, what we're going to do is we're going to move ourselves, as Warren told me, very far out on a statistical limb, needlessly so. We're going to just start making guesses on top of guesses. We're going to get further away from what the right answer actually could be. Whereas college students walk around the world without that expectation. They have no expectation that they know the answer. And as a result, they are willing to consider a far wider range of potential answers, which I think is the reason why young people are able to walk into existing industries and come up with disruptive ideas, because they're willing to consider the things that the quote unquote experts are no longer even able to engage with or see. This is what it means to widen your bands. It is available to all of us. We don't have to be college kids to do this, but we have to be really mindful to counter-program what we have programmed ourselves to do.
Boy, and that's a tall order right there, is to reprogram ourselves. especially based on what you said at the onset of this. Hey, Jason, hang on one second. Let me say a shout out to my sponsor of this, and we'll finish up our conversation in just a moment. Since 1978, LIA administrators and insurance services have been offering E&O insurance to valuation professionals. Listen, Peter, Claudia over there, they apply superior customer service, exceptional liability education, and unparalleled claim defense to service over 10,000 real estate professionals nationwide. They have a variety of coverage. Be sure and check them out. Visit liability.com to learn more about how LIA can protect you and your business. Thank you, LIA, for being a sponsor of the Appraisal Update podcast. We certainly appreciate it. So, Jason, again, I could just hold you here all day and pick your brain. And I know you're a busy guy. You got lots on your plate. But if you could just indulge me for a couple more quick questions, right?
Absolutely.
So on page 83 of your book.
Oh, boy.
That wasn't a test. It's okay.
Good, because I don't know what's on that.
I understand. This is a Reid Hoffman, I guess. LinkedIn co-founder. By the way, I'm on LinkedIn, so you guys link me. It says it advises that people live in a state of permanent beta. It's the phase when something is being tested and refined. I think this is a recommendation, right? What if people live like that? What if we considered ourselves to be forever a work in progress? And so I think this is where we're talking about, let's not be closed-minded. Let's be an open mind to change. As Jason said, your life's going to be different, guaranteed, in just a few years. I say look in the mirror. It's happening daily. Things are going to change. So if you could accept that instead of resist that, talk about this living in permanent beta or beta testing.
Yeah, I really love that concept of Reid's. So, a product in beta is a product that has been put out really for the specific purpose of people using it, sometimes for the first time, giving feedback. The creators of this product know it's going to have to change quite a bit, and they're very open to that. And that is a really wonderful way to think of ourselves as products in permanent beta, which is to say that we are always that. We are never a finished product. And I know that that's easy to say and harder to do because, of course, every day you've got to go out and be something. But I offer, and this is a little later in the book, I think, but I offer this way in which I think we really need to define ourselves differently than we often do. I bet a lot of people who are listening to this show, if someone were to come up to them at a party and say, "What do you do?" your answer would be some version of the tasks that you perform or the role that you occupy. And that makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. I do a version of that myself. Somebody asked me what I do at a party. But deep down underneath that, we better have an idea of the more core value that we provide to the world, because the tasks that we perform and the role that we occupy are very easily disruptable. They will change. Ways that we do our work will change. Sometimes our work will change. Our industry will change. And so we will feel, if we are identified too closely with those things that are going to change, then when they do change, we won't just feel like we have lost the way that we work. We'll feel like we lost our identity. And that's really scary. So what I always encourage people to do, and I have actually very recently run a number of friends through this exercise as they've tried to figure out what's next for their career, is to start going down deeper into your understanding of yourself. So for example, I was just talking to a friend who is stuck at a magazine that he doesn't like being at anymore, and frankly, he's also not sure that he wants to even stay in magazines. So I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm a writer and an editor." And I said, "All right, well, let me ask you again. I'm a writer and editor at X magazine, and I do these kinds of stories." Okay, so what's the next level down here? Let me ask you again, what do? You can't access anything that you just told me. Now, instead, tell me about your skills. Let's go a level deeper. He says, okay, well, I guess I'm really good at editing and writing. I was like, all right, but those are expressions of skills. So what do you do? What are you good at? And he says, well, I guess I'm good at going into situations that are complex and then telling stories about them that help people understand these complex things. And I said, awesome. All right, let's go one level deeper. What do you do? Can't talk about your tasks, can't talk about your skills. As you're listening to this at home, please like kind of play along for yourself here. What now do we say if we were asked this one more time? I think that what we should do is we should identify a mission statement for ourselves. It's short, it's one sentence, it starts with I, every word carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that is easily changeable. For me, I tell stories in my own voice instead of magazine editor or podcast host or whatever. That's me. I tell stories in my own voice. My friend who I was doing this with, he said, I make complex issues simple. I love that because once he figured that out, we suddenly had a lot more to talk about. Because before, he thought of himself as just a magazine editor, and the only thing that he could do is be a magazine editor, and the only way in which he could operate as a magazine editor. But that's a scary place to be because, frankly, there aren't a lot of magazine editor jobs anymore. But now that he's a person who can make complex ideas simple, there's all sorts of things to talk about. Well, I don't know, advertising, people do that in advertising. Consulting, people do that in consulting. How do you creatively apply taking complex ideas and making them simple? Because once you do that, you realize all the pivot points. Now, you may not want to leave appraising, and that's fine. That's great. You love what you do. You're in it. You're good at it. So I'm not talking about making a massive change, but I am maybe talking about that if the industry shifts or there are different ways to operate, that what you're realizing is that there are different ways for you to express the core value that you have. Once you have an idea of what part of you does not change in times of change, you're able to recognize that you have inherent value. And so, you know what? Maybe you put the clipboard away and you figure out another way to record things and engage with people. And that doesn't change how you do your work, or maybe it does change a little bit of how you do your work, but it doesn't change the value that you provide to people. And in fact, it might enhance that value. It might unlock further value. The more in which you are able to understand your own relationship with change, the more in which you're able to pivot around it. That's what it means to live in permanent beta.
You know, wow, that's amazing. And right now, appraisers are scared. They're frustrated. As I'm sure you're aware, the interest rates have went up substantially over the last year. They're more than double than what they were a year ago today. And as a consequence, appraisers went from being extremely busy, and with that workload being so significant, they were extremely independent. I can pick and choose which assignments I want. I can work for this client or not work for that client. And now just the reverse has happened. You know, we have some appraisers taking side jobs or, you know, getting out of the business for that matter. I've always said as a business owner, you're a problem solver, right? You got problems to solve. And on page 4 of your book, you said something similar. It says, an entrepreneur is someone who makes things happen for themselves. What do you mean by that? They make things happen? Because later in your book, you said an entrepreneur isn't necessarily a business owner. You can be employed by somebody else and still be an entrepreneur. And I'd like for you to talk on those. And then I promise I'm about to let you go.
Okay. I've been enjoying this. So I came to that definition of entrepreneur because when I got to Entrepreneur Magazine, I started talking to our audience and I realized that they were coming at this term entrepreneur from so many different angles. Some of them are traditional, what we would think of as entrepreneurs. They are small business owners, for example, but other people are side hustlers or they're really intrapreneurs inside of large organizations. But I found that what people were connecting to with the word wasn't a specific career set, but rather it was a mindset and a culture and an identity. And it all oriented around people who were self-motivated, who were identifying opportunities and then building things for themselves. And when they do that, of course, they build things that are rewarding and useful for their communities and for their teams and for their industries. And so I loved embracing that term because number one, it just opened the umbrella, but frankly, also it just leaned into what had happened in the culture already, which is that so many people were identifying with the word entrepreneur. And I think that that's really valuable. And to the point that you were just making about how people have had to maybe take some side gigs or that the way in which they've done their appraisal work has had to change, I would keep this in mind for anybody who's experiencing that. We are in a moment of great disruption, no question about it. And it is unpredictable and largely uncontrollable. But here's what you need to know. you are not the only person going through change. Other people are too. Other people who you work with are, partners in business are, customers are, the whole world is. And when change happens, people need solutions. And you can be in a position to provide new solutions, perhaps solutions that are better than the incumbents or the people that those other people would used to turn to are able to do themselves. And so it might mean that you have to rethink the way in which you serve people or the business that you do, or adding on new services or whatever the case is. But I am telling you that it's not as if you have been carved out of something that is otherwise stable. You are part of an ecosystem of change, and other people need the things that you can provide. And if you can be smart about how you can solve a problem for someone else, then you solve your own problem too. And that's the thing that I have seen over and over again that incredibly smart entrepreneurs do. When I went to my very last social event before COVID led to lockdowns everywhere, it was a dinner that I went to for, it was my friend had a birthday dinner at a crowded restaurant. And I sit down and I start talking to this woman whose name is Megan Asha. And she is the co-founder, or she's the founder and CEO or something of a industry trade show company called Founder Made. And I've spoken at Founder Made events, and they're great and they're well attended. So she has a live events business. Live events are being shut down. Right. You want to talk about industries being disrupted, appraisals now, but live events back then, certainly. And so I said to her, I said, Megan, it looks like live events are going to get shut down for a while. What are you feeling? What are you going to do? And she said, I got to say, I'm actually really excited about this. And the reason is because we have had all of these ideas for new lines of revenue and new ways to expand the business. And we've never really been able to engage or explore them because the live events consume all of our resources and energy. So now if the live events are going to be on pause, we finally have the time to start exploring some of these other ideas. And at the time, I remember thinking, Megan is a woman with zero fear. Like, that is an incredible way to think. But later, I realized, no, that's not the case. Megan had fear because everyone at that time had fear. Like so many people right now in their own disruptive industries have fear. But she was utilizing that fear in a specific way. Instead of using it as many people do, which is to say, I am afraid of losing the thing that I had, and therefore put a lot of energy into trying to hold on to what came before. Megan was afraid of not finding the solution that was available to her next. And so she was using that fear to propel her forward rather than fear of going rather than fear that made her look backwards. Because look, it doesn't matter what is happening to you or your industry. Something will happen next. So the world is not going to stop. Something will happen next. Something will happen tomorrow. It will happen after the day after that. It will happen the day after that. Something will keep happening. So the question is, do you want to be a part of that thing that's continuing to happen? The new solutions, developing the future of whatever work you're in? Or do you want to say, I really wish that we went back to the time where I could call my own shots and walk around with a clipboard, at which point you are protecting a thing that is going to disappear. But you don't have to disappear, and the value that you provide doesn't have to disappear. But you have to start to harness the things that you do have, including fear, to start looking forward.
Love it. Don't wait for the next opportunity. Create your next opportunity, right? I absolutely love it. Right. Jason, thank you so much for being here. I mean, I could just talk to you all day long. If some of my listeners, and we have some viewers because we have a YouTube channel too, if any of them want to get this book, how's the best way for them to order this book?
So you can get it on wherever you get books. It's available audio, so Audible. It's available ebook. It's available hardcover, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get books, you can find this book. It's called Build for Tomorrow. Would love for you to check it out. Also, I will say I have a newsletter that comes out every week, and it is called One Thing Better. And each week I give you one way to improve your work. And a lot of the stuff that we talked about today is the kind of stuff that shows up on that newsletter. So you can find find that by going to onethingbetter.email. That's a URL. You can plug it into your domain, into your browser, onethingbetter.email. So Build for Tomorrow is the book, and One Thing Better is the newsletter.
Talk about the podcast real quick. Where can they listen to your podcast, and what's it? I think you said you had more than one. What's it about?
Oh yeah, well I'll just tell you one. So I'm loading you up with stuff here, and so anyway, it's called Help Wanted, and most episodes. Sometimes we do other things, but most episodes, what we do is me and my co-host, who is Nicole Lappin, a best-selling money expert. We bring somebody on who has a work problem. Maybe it's that they feel stuck in their career. Maybe it's that they want to ask for a raise. Maybe it's that they got turned down for a job because they don't have enough social media followers, which was literally a question that we got recently. And then we talk them through it. We talk them through the problem. We come up with some solutions. And in doing so, we hope that listeners start to solve their problems too.
One more time. That's Help Wanted.
Help Wanted. And you can find Help Wanted wherever you get podcasts.
Great. Thank you once again, Jason Feifer. I mean, what an incredible young man, and a good author, because I'm really enjoying this book, and that's hard for me. So you've got me excited about it, and I'm anxious to finish it. So you'll have to come back after I finish the other half, and we'll talk more in depth about the rest of the book.
Would love to. Thanks so much, man.
All right. Thanks again. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Appraisal Update podcast, brought to you as always by Appraiser eLearning. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're trying to diversify. Maybe business is picking up a little bit. I've been hearing from appraisers around the country that business is starting to pick up a little bit. Our business has started picking up a little bit, so I hope yours is too. Until next time, I'm your host, Brian Reynolds. Happy appraising.
The Appraisal Update podcast is brought to you by Appraiser eLearning.